I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Luis Wong, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Imperial County Office of Ed and representing K-12 in Scenic. We have three great presentations this morning, and we're going to go ahead and start with our first one, Achieving Successful Project Management Office Outcomes in Education Institutions by Brad Robbins. Brad Robbins is Vice President of Products and Customer Management at Solution Q Inc. Since co-founding Solutions Q Inc., Brad has been primarily responsible for product management, project management, and service delivery. He has also authored and co-authored articles published in industry periodicals and in industry websites. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brad. I will ask you, if you do have questions to Brad, we'll have a question-answer period at the end of his 20-minute presentation. I do ask that you use the mic that's here to your right-hand side. And so with that, Brad, you want to get us started?
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning. I thought I would start off with this because I don't know what everybody's background here is in project management, and sometimes it tends to put people to sleep. So I don't know if it's good or bad that I'm the first one kicking off the morning, but just to, I've been doing this for probably 20 years, project portfolio management, building tools around that. I'd like to think that I'm immune to the whole zombie syndrome here, but I certainly have had many a morning where I look like that as a result of managing projects, minus the hair anyway. But in 15 minutes, I don't think we're going to have to, you don't have to worry that we're going to get too far into that kind of detail. What I did want to cover today, and I'm going to skim through a couple of things. I added a couple of slides into the deck. I knew it was being distributed, but we'll skim through a couple just for the sake of time today. We did a brief survey in advance of this, just to get a kind of lay of the land currently in terms of project management office in higher education. So I'm going to go over some highlights of the results of that. We'll do a little PMO basics or 101 just for some context, talk about critical success factors and roadmap. I'll highlight three things that I think are important as it relates to education institutions. And we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the virtual PMO or PMO of one, because I think it's a concept that has a lot of applicability. We're seeing it in organizations like healthcare and higher education, and I think it's worth just noting. And again, I'll just wrap up with a quick comment on some considerations, or I guess a reminder of a couple of things as they relate to higher education. So the survey that we talked about, we sent it out through EDUCAUSE project management interest group, as well as our database of education contacts. We got 122 respondents from 108 different institutions, so not bad for a quick survey. This first one, which was, do you have a formal PMO? Well, I was a little surprised. I didn't know how I could kind of massage these numbers to make them mean anything statistically. The one thing I saw is that about a third of people recognized that they did have PMOs. There was clearly some that said they didn't, and a big portion that said they don't know. And again, I'm not entirely sure definitively what to take from this, although I would say in organizations where the kind of people who responded don't know whether there is or isn't a PMO is probably indicative of something. Either it's got an extremely small scope or mandate, or there isn't a lot of sponsorship or promotion of this office. In terms of whether they were technology-focused PMOs or enterprise, probably not surprising or in keeping with, I think, industry statistics. 2/3 were IT-focused. I think we see in most cases that IT is sort of the tip of the spear in these sorts of things. And in a lot of cases where they succeed, it does actually start to permeate the rest of the organization. But I think this is in keeping with probably industry standard statistics. Well, we did not provide a definition of exactly what we meant by virtual. We did want to get a sense of whether they were staffed formally or not. And 2/3, a little more than 2/3 were staffed of the PMOs that were identified. And I'm going to, as I said, I have a slide specifically on the virtual PMO because I think there is some real merits to it. And one of the other things that we asked was name the top 2 areas of focus for the PMOs. Whether you're working in them or whether you know of them, what's your perception? And in this order, descending order, was what we saw. And again, probably to some extent predictable, but we did confirm this. So project management being the top focus, so doing projects right or better. Portfolio alignment and prioritization, taking on, selecting the right work to do. Resource management, obviously managing probably the dearest constraint we have in terms of delivering the work. And then communication, so transparency, engagement, communication across projects. So what is a PMO? Good question. Probably a question that we should be thinking about, and there's a different answer probably for everybody. And kind of driven a little bit by the mandate, whether you're talking about project management office, program, portfolio. You can go out and hunt down nice, formal, wordy definitions as well. This one's from PMBOK. I like to keep it simple, quite frankly, as I think most modern PMOs look at both doing projects right and doing the right projects. So ultimately, these are groups that help us or facilitate us moving forward, achieving our strategic objectives. And it's usually through a combination of both of those things, picking the right initiatives and better execution of those initiatives. Another good question is, hey, why might I want one of those if I don't currently have it? And there's probably a lot of answers, a lot of good answers to that question, but it is a question that you need to ask. It's not because your colleague at another institution happens to get one. It's not because you heard some dude talking about PMOs today. You want to make sure that you're thinking about, is this right for me? So certainly PMOs are seen as ways to improve a number of things, or potentially improve a number of things. Project outcomes, so success, ultimately, probably the most obvious. We don't bat 1,000 no matter what organization or institution we're in, and we may want to get better. Communications, certainly education institutions would be a great example where we've got lots of different faculties, stakeholders, facilities. Communication is critical. Actually, before the session, I heard a gentleman over here doing all kinds of project management talk, and you know, at the core of it ultimately was communication. So I was interested to see that. When we talk about resource management, certainly is a key topic of discussion today, key focus. Ultimately, we often sometimes say it's all about the resources. And to start to get better insights into that, you need better data, and PMOs could potentially help facilitate that. And ultimately, if we see any value in any of the processes or procedures around project or portfolio management, a question that sometimes is overlooked is who's going to own that? Because without ownership of some of these processes, and PMO is not the only answer to this, by the way, but without ownership of some of these processes, they're just not going to work. You'll see them kind of die a slow death on the vine, ultimately. I'm not going to go through this in detail, although I would say, you know, not everybody who doesn't have a PMO today should be running out to initiate one. This sort of highlights some of the things. You need to take a bit of stock and understand, do any of these sound familiar to me? So really, I guess in layman's terms, are we experiencing pain associated with any of these questions or conditions like this? Do we acknowledge it as an organization enough to take on the effort to change it? Because project management offices don't come without a cost and some effort. Okay, so this really is kind of about taking that stock and understanding where may a project management office provide value rather than being purely overhead, okay, or additional administration. If you do decide that this is a road we want to go down, it's important for us, and we've asked some of those questions we need to. There are some critical success factors that I think apply to anybody. So there is a standard set of things that you need to think about in any kind of organization. And I've highlighted here, I will highlight here 3 that I think are important, particularly as you think about it within your organizations, because the first 3 that I'm going to highlight here really speak to or relate to the organizational uniqueness, okay, that may be present in some of your institutions. So the first is committed sponsorship. Absolutely critical. We start going around and shifting kind of power, or at least the perception of power, or changing people's processes. You need it not just for funding. This is not just to, write a check, but someone that can back you as you start to move through this process. Organizational fit. So it's there's always been, or there still is, a large body of knowledge about project management offices out there, but there is no one size fits all. And sometimes going from theory to practice, it's not clear how to do that in a practical way. You have to think of something that'll fit your organizational culture and tied to what you're trying to achieve. And then it can slowly facilitate that change that you may be looking for. And world-class change management. This means a lot of things. Obviously, it's a broad topic, but I'll just highlight things, again, particular to organizations like yours. Really understanding your stakeholders. You're going to have a lot of constituents potentially affected by this kind of thing, so understanding that, you know, what may it change for them, what may it ask of them to do, what maybe is in it for them, and understanding that. Some of the others here I won't really hit on, so we want to make sure that we're delivering value, and that starts at a business case, and that we're communicating that regularly, that we've got competent staff. I'll talk about this, or I'll highlight this when we talk about the virtual PMO. I can't believe I have to say this, but managing the implementation of a PMO needs to be done like a project. It's incredible how many times we end up as a software vendor working with customers that say they're halfway down this road, and there's no sense of plan or organization around it whatsoever. So I guess it does need to be stated. And while I am a software guy, I'll try and be objective here. I think it is critical nowadays that you make strategic use of tools like Eclipse. There are others out there, but they can really help remove some of that administrative burden. And again, particularly in organizations like yours, where not everybody's co-located, sitting in the same, you know, set of cubicles or whatever, removing some of that, facilitating transparency and sharing of information. I will be really quick here just to say this roadmap, again, we've identified critical success factors. Now what does this journey look like? Really high level, so this is not intended by any means to be a project plan. But what I tried to illustrate here is the cyclical nature of this. This journey ideally is not one stop. So you're not going from wherever you are to the end goal in one stop. So we're going to do things like, I talked about this before, what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to measure whether we're achieving that? Put that business case together, define our sponsor. As we move into planning, we identify who's going to be our lead, what's our mandate, governance structure, those kinds of things. As you get into execution, this is really, you know, the meat of the project, where we're starting to identify documentation, processes, configure tools, roll it out to our staff, et cetera. And then we get into the operational state, where we're delivering the services that we defined. We're continuing to support that, our feet in the street. We're listening for feedback so that we can incorporate into 2.0, 3.0, et cetera, as we continue to go down this road to our multiple stops along the journey. And one of the things that often gets forgotten is we decided at the beginning we're doing this for a reason. And we said that there's some measures that are going to be indicative of whether we're winning or losing. They're probably trailing indicators, but nonetheless we should be measuring them so that we could start to correct course if we need to, or improve our processes or modify our processes. So the virtual PMO. We have certainly seen in the last probably 5 to 7 years a great deal of attention, execution, some successful, some not at this, but I think this concept has a lot of merit. And this is it's really the PMO of one, essentially, where you've got one person who is in the role of coordinator or facilitator, and they are working with people from out the organization to collectively deliver some of the same services that you would have otherwise delivered in a traditionally staffed PMO, okay? So that's sort of the setup. Now, where it makes a lot of sense, so a lot of organizations it kind of comes from two sides. We see the value, we see the need for this, we want to improve in certain areas. We're not quite prepared to fully invest in this, though, because PMOs have a checkered background. Maybe we don't have the excellence that we might need. So there is a bit of a hesitation. So we want to dip our toe in the water, if you will. And the adaptive, iterative nature of this, I think, does lend itself to that, certainly. One of the things that is critical is sponsorship and promotion. I think if you imagine the poor guy or woman who are in that facilitator role in an organization where this concept has not been communicated, yet you're relying on people from other departments to work with you to deliver these services, that could be a lonely position to be in. So absolutely critical, more so than even in a traditionally staffed organization. The capabilities of the person in that role are critical, not only because you're going to have to rely on a lot of soft skills, negotiation and facilitation, communication, but you're going to be seen as that expert anyway. So that's really critical as well. Much like I said earlier, you're going to make sure you want to leverage technology appropriately. Again, in this scenario, you are almost definitively not co-located, so easing some of those communication and sharing of information would be critical, and you want to put as few hurdles in front of the people who you are relying on as possible. You have to be a missionary in this role. You have to swing people to your view of the world because none of them report to you, and that's just a fact, so you can't be a dictator. The other one not to get sucked into is you have to know your limitations. Oftentimes the people who get put in these roles are really gung-ho. They might have had success previously, but you have to remember that you're relying on potentially part of other people's time. They've got the proverbial day job. So as enthusiastic as you may be, they may not have the cycles to kind of go with you. Usually we see that okay in the first iteration, but where people start to get some success, then they get tempted into swinging for the fences. Okay, so it's really important in those scenarios that you continue to remember, at least until things change, that you're relying on people who have other responsibilities as well. And speaking of things changing, I would just say that it is critical in the vast majority of cases. A virtual PMO or a PMO of one really should be a stepping stone to greater investment in it. If you've had some success and you've started to see the value in the organization, fight that complacency to accept good enough is good enough. There will be exceptions where you've literally achieved everything that you would want to achieve, and anything more would be gold plating, but that's the vast minority of cases. Okay? So the last thing that I just want to wrap up here, because I think we're almost out of time and I'll leave maybe 1 or 2 minutes for questions, is specifically related. So we've been doing this a lot. A lot of our time, my time specifically, has been spent in healthcare organizations, higher ed in the last couple of years. And there's a lot of similarities, obviously. So I've highlighted what I think are the 3 critical success factors. And again, because they are related to, or they are where that uniqueness or the dynamics of your organizational structure may come into play. Well, we all tend to think that we're different, we're unique. You know, our organizations are completely different than any other organization that has rolled out a PMO. I think from the perspective of PMOs generally, we're trying to achieve the same goals. The challenges are similar, and a lot of the considerations are also similar. So you should take that not as an insult or contradictory, more as you're not alone. You're not charting new territory here necessarily. And the other thing I would say, in trying to just wrap up with a balanced view, I said not everybody here who doesn't have a PMO should go out and initiate one, and I think that's absolutely critical. You got to think about, are we asking the right questions, and is this in fact either the or an appropriate vehicle to be solving some of those challenges? It's not a silver bullet, and you won't be successful without some commitment to it. A minute or so left, so I'm certainly more than happy to answer any questions, and I think for the web audience it was either to ask them at the mic or I can repeat them if anybody has a question that I'm able to repeat. 9 o'clock in the morning and project management stuff has...
I'm going to ask you to repeat, so I don't want to press through.
Sure.
Which educational institutions do you see implementing PMOs currently? If there was one we could go look at, or two, and maybe, you know, college, university.
Yeah, so if I mean, I'll speak, I guess, a little from our experience, obviously. Broward County down in Florida, in terms of the district school board there, is doing it. I think they have taken a really interesting or a really appropriate ABC kind of approach, where they've assessed where are we now. You know, they brought in someone new to run this specifically, and I think she's taken a very pragmatic approach to it, and I really suspect that they'll see a lot of success because of that. Trying to think in terms of ones that I would highlight on the on sort of higher ed side. I'm thinking of Ivy Tech Community College, one that we worked with, again specifically. One of their key focuses, really 2 things: communication and resource management. And I think, again, It's tough to say, really. I understand kind of where you're getting at, where we would look at it as kind of a standard. I do think it's critical to say everybody is a little bit different, and I suspect in their case, they looked at the pure delta between we're being asked to do this much and we have this much capacity as their key driver, the kind of the Death Star that they were trying to get their head around. And that's why they've targeted that specifically. And I think, again, they've got it's that laser focus. Probably a theme is that laser focus on picking a top 1 or 2 or 3 things to tackle and excelling at that before you move on to item number 20 and 25 on the list, I guess. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to be around the rest of the day, so hopefully I'll have a chance to chat with everybody, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference.